The first wave of F-6F Hellcats screamed over Clark Field at 0630 hours, their 50-caliber machine guns stitching deadly patterns across the runway as dozens of Japanese aircraft exploded in towering balls of orange flame. Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison pulled his fighter into a steep climb, watching through his canopy as TBM Avengers from USS Essex dropped their 500-pound bombs with surgical precision onto the main hangar complex. Below, the carefully orchestrated Christmas morning attack was unfolding exactly as Admiral Mark Mitscher had planned it 3 days earlier aboard his flagship USS Lexington. What the Japanese High Command had assumed would be a quiet holiday morning was rapidly becoming their worst nightmare in the Philippine campaign. The massive carrier strike had begun before dawn when 24 Essex-class fleet carriers of Task Force 38 launched their aircraft into the pre-dawn darkness. Each carrier contributed its full complement of fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes, creating an aerial armada of over 2,010 aircraft that represented the largest single-day carrier operation in Pacific theater history. The Japanese defenders at Clark Field, Nichols Field, and a dozen other airstrips across Luzon had been caught completely off guard, their pilots still in their quarters celebrating what they believed would be a peaceful Christmas day. 3 weeks earlier, Admiral Chester Nimitz had received intelligence reports from his codebreakers at Pearl Harbor indicating that Japanese forces in the Philippines were planning a major counteroffensive for late December. The intercepts revealed that Imperial Japanese Army and Navy air units were concentrating their remaining aircraft at major airfields on Luzon, preparing for coordinated attacks against General MacArthur's invasion forces on Leyte. With American ground troops locked in fierce fighting across the central Philippines, the last thing the Pacific Fleet needed was a resurgent Japanese air threat attacking their supply lines and beachheads. Admiral William Bull Halsey, commanding 3rd Fleet from his flagship USS New Jersey, had received explicit orders to neutralize this threat before it could materialize. His Task Force 38, built around the most powerful concentration of aircraft carriers ever assembled, possessed the firepower to destroy every airfield within 500 miles of Manila Bay. The timing was perfect. Japanese commanders would naturally expect reduced American activity during the Christmas holiday, making December 25th the ideal date for a surprise attack that could cripple enemy air power for months. The order of battle reflected the enormous industrial capacity that had transformed the United States Navy since Pearl Harbor. Task Group 38 1. Under Rear Admiral John McCain, included carriers USS Hornet, USS Bennington, USS Belleau Wood, and USS San Jacinto, escorted by fast battleships USS Iowa and USS New Jersey. Task Group 38 2, commanded by Rear Admiral Gerald Bogan, centered on USS Hancock, USS Ticonderoga, USS Langley, and USS Cabot, with battleship USS Washington providing additional firepower. Task Group 38-3, led by Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman, operated carriers USS Essex, USS Princeton, USS Cowpens, and USS Monterey, supported by battleship USS Massachusetts. Task Group 38-4, under Rear Admiral Ralph Davison, controlled carriers USS Enterprise, USS Franklin, USS Belleau Wood, and USS Independence, with battleship USS Alabama standing guard. Against this overwhelming force, Japanese commanders could deploy perhaps 400 operational aircraft scattered across their Philippine airfields, many flown by inexperienced pilots with minimal training time. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier aviation had been virtually eliminated during the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot 6 months earlier, while Army air units struggled with chronic fuel shortages and increasingly unreliable equipment. As Morrison's Hellcat completed its strafing run and climbed toward the rendezvous point, black smoke columns were already rising from a dozen airfields across Luzon, marking the beginning of what would become known as the Christmas Day Massacre. The operational plan for Task Force 38's Christmas surprise had been meticulously crafted during 3 days of intensive planning aboard Admiral Mitscher's flagship. His air operations officer, Commander John Thash, had personally coordinated the strike packages to ensure maximum destructive effect across 27 identified targets. Each carrier air group received specific assignments based on their aircraft capabilities and pilot experience levels. The veteran squadrons from USS Essex and USS Enterprise would tackle the heavily defended primary airfields around Manila, while newer carrier air groups focused on smaller installations and shipping targets in Manila Bay. Weather conditions on December 25th proved ideal for the massive operation. Clear skies and light winds allowed precise navigation and bombing, while a temperature inversion layer helped conceal the approaching American formations until they were directly over their targets. The Philippine Sea remained relatively calm, enabling efficient flight operations from all 24 carriers without the delays that rough seas typically imposed on launch and recovery cycles. Admiral Halsey had positioned his task groups approximately 150 miles east of Luzon, close enough to minimize flight times while remaining beyond the range of Japanese land-based bombers. The first indication of trouble for Japanese defenders came at 6:15 hours, when radar operators at Fort Stotzenberg detected massive air formations approaching from the northeast. Lieutenant Colonel Saburo Takahashi, commanding the 4th Air Army's fighter squadrons at Clark Field, had only 18 operational Ki-61 fighters available for immediate launch. His pilots scrambled desperately, but they faced an impossible tactical situation. Over 400 American fighters were already sweeping toward their airfield, with another 300 dive bombers and torpedo planes following close behind. Commander David McCampbell, leading Carrier Air Group 15 from USS Essex, coordinated the initial fighter sweep with practiced precision. His F-6F Hellcats approached Clark Field in 4 plane divisions, with each section assigned specific areas of the airfield complex. The lead division concentrated on aircraft parked near the main runway, while the second division targeted fuel storage facilities and maintenance hangars. McCampbell's own division focused on the control tower and radar installations, recognizing that disrupting Japanese command and control systems would multiply the effectiveness of subsequent bombing runs. The combat action report from VF-15 would later describe the scene as a turkey shoot exceeded only by the Marianas operation. Japanese pilots attempting to taxi their fighters toward the runway found themselves under immediate attack from multiple directions. Zero fighters and Ki-61 Tonys exploded on the ground before they could build up takeoff speed, while those few aircraft that managed to become airborne faced overwhelming odds against experienced American naval aviators flying superior equipment. Lieutenant Robert Duncan, piloting an SB-2C Helldiver from USS Hancock, led the first dive bombing attack against the main hangar complex at Nichols Field. His squadron approached from 12 Iwo feet, diving through moderate anti-aircraft fire to release their 1 Iwo-pound bombs with devastating accuracy. The primary maintenance hangar disappeared in a massive secondary explosion as aviation gasoline and ammunition stores detonated simultaneously. Duncan's wingman, Ensign Thomas Mitchell, scored direct hits on 2 smaller hangars, while the remaining aircraft in their division systematically destroyed every building larger than a small shed. Meanwhile, TBM Avenger squadrons from Task Group 38. 3 concentrated on shipping targets in Manila Bay. Lieutenant Commander Paul Henderson, commanding VT-83 from USS Essex, led 18 torpedo bombers in a coordinated attack against a Japanese convoy that had sought shelter in what they assumed was a protected anchorage. Henderson's aircraft approached at wave-top level, their radar altimeters maintaining precise altitude control as they threaded between anti-aircraft positions on Corregidor Island. The convoy included 2 destroyers, 4 cargo vessels, and a converted seaplane tender loaded with aviation fuel for Philippine airfields. Henderson's lead division concentrated on the largest cargo ship, scoring 3 torpedo hits that broke the vessel's back and sent it to the bottom within minutes. His second division attacked the destroyers, achieving 1 confirmed hit that left IJN Isakaze dead in the water with her engine room flooded. The 3rd Division systematically sank both remaining cargo vessels, while the 4th Division set the fuel tender ablaze with incendiary bombs that created a smoke column visible from 50 miles away. By 0700 hours, less than 1 hour after the first American fighters crossed the Philippine coastline, Japanese air defenses across Luzon had been effectively neutralized. Radio communications between airfields had been severed, radar installations destroyed, and fuel storage facilities set ablaze. More critically, over 200 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed on the ground, representing nearly half of all operational air assets in the Philippine Islands. The few enemy fighters that managed to get airborne faced hopeless odds and were quickly shot down by prowling Hellcats that maintained air superiority over every major airfield. The psychological impact on Japanese ground forces proved equally devastating. Troops who had expected a quiet Christmas morning instead witnessed the complete destruction of their air cover, leaving them vulnerable to continued American attacks throughout the coming weeks. Admiral Mitscher observed the unfolding destruction from USS Lexington's Combat Information Center, where plotting boards displayed the real-time position of every American strike group across the Philippine archipelago. His operations staff maintained constant radio contact with air group commanders, providing updated target assignments as reconnaissance flights identified new opportunities. The initial success at Clark Field and Nichols Field had exceeded all planning estimates, allowing Mitscher to redirect reserve squadrons against secondary targets that intelligence had previously considered too well defended for effective attack. The preparatory phase of Operation Christmas Package, as the strike had been codenamed, included coordinated naval gunfire from Task Force 38's escort vessels. Battleships, USS Iowa and USS Washington, approached to within 20 yards of the Luzon coastline, their 16-inch main batteries delivering precision bombardment against coastal radar installations and anti-aircraft positions. Each battleship fired 200 armor-piercing rounds during the 30-minute naval gunfire phase, their shells guided by aerial spotters who adjusted fire in real time to maximize destructive effect. Destroyer divisions from each task group conducted simultaneous attacks against Japanese shipping in smaller harbors along the Luzon coast. USS Fletcher and USS O'Brien, operating as a hunter-killer team, intercepted a Japanese supply convoy attempting to reach the embattled garrison on Bataan Peninsula. Their 5-inch .38 caliber guns achieved multiple hits on enemy vessels at ranges exceeding 15,000 yards, demonstrating the superior fire control systems that gave American destroyers decisive advantages in surface engagements. The tactical coordination between carrier aviation and surface vessels represented a new level of integrated warfare that Japanese commanders had never previously encountered. When Lieutenant Commander Morrison's fighter squadron reported a concentration of enemy aircraft at a previously unknown airstrip near Cabanatuan, USS Massachusetts immediately adjusted her bombardment schedule to suppress anti-aircraft defenses, while dive bombers from USS Hornet attacked the newly discovered target. This kind of real-time coordination between air and surface units required communications technology and command structures that the Imperial Japanese Navy simply could not match. Commander Thatch's air operations plan included provisions for sustained attacks throughout the daylight hours, ensuring that Japanese forces would receive no respite to reorganize their defenses. As the initial strike groups returned to their carriers for refueling and rearming, second-wave formations were already approaching their assigned targets. This continuous pressure prevented enemy air units from attempting coordinated counterattacks while maintaining psychological pressure on ground forces who could see American aircraft operating with complete impunity over their positions. Before the decisive hours of this battle unfold, from which city or country are you watching? Subscribe for more in-depth Pacific War stories, and leave a like if you value this kind of analysis. The leapfrogging tactics employed by carrier air group commanders allowed American forces to maintain constant air coverage over critical target areas while rotating squadrons back to their carriers for routine maintenance and pilot rest. VF-27 from USS Princeton would maintain combat air patrol over Manila Bay, while VF-83 from USS Essex refueled and rearmed. Then the roles would reverse, ensuring that Japanese forces never enjoyed air superiority even for brief periods. This systematic approach to air operations reflected the industrial capacity and logistical sophistication that had transformed American naval aviation since the dark days of 1942. Intelligence reports from codebreakers at Pearl Harbor had provided Task Force 38 with detailed information about Japanese command structures and communication systems. When American strike groups systematically destroyed radio relay stations and telephone exchanges, they effectively blinded Japanese commanders who could no longer coordinate defensive operations between different airfields and military installations. The resulting confusion allowed American forces to achieve tactical surprise repeatedly throughout the day, even though the overall attack was no longer secret. Admiral Halsey's decision to commit his entire available striking power to this single operation demonstrated the confidence American commanders now felt in their ability to overwhelm Japanese defenses through sheer concentrated firepower. Unlike the cautious probing attacks that had characterized earlier Pacific operations, Christmas Day 1944 represented total operational commitment designed to achieve decisive results in minimum time. The psychological effect on Japanese morale proved as important as the physical destruction of their military assets. Fighter Squadron 15's Combat Action Report documented the systematic destruction of enemy aircraft with clinical precision. McCampbell's pilots had developed standardized attack patterns that maximized their ammunition effectiveness while minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft fire. Each four-plane division approached its target area in a shallow dive, allowing all aircraft to concentrate their fire on the same target before pulling up and repositioning for additional attacks. This coordinated approach typically resulted in complete destruction of enemy aircraft with minimal ammunition expenditure. The moment of maximum crisis for Japanese defenders arrived when American strike groups achieved complete air superiority over all major airfields simultaneously. With no operational fighters remaining to challenge American formations, Japanese ground forces could only watch helplessly as wave after wave of dive bombers and torpedo planes attacked military installations with methodical precision. The few anti-aircraft positions that remained operational were quickly silenced by strafing attacks from F-6F Hellcats, whose pilots had been specifically briefed on the location of enemy gun positions. The decisive moment of the Christmas Day operation arrived at 10:30 hours, when Japanese commanders at Fort Stotzenberg transmitted their final radio message acknowledging the complete destruction of organized air defenses throughout Luzon. Colonel Takahashi's desperate attempts to coordinate counterattacks between surviving aircraft had failed completely, leaving scattered individual pilots to face overwhelming American air superiority without central direction or mutual support. His last transmission reported the loss of over 300 aircraft destroyed on the ground, with fewer than 50 operational fighters remaining across all Philippine airfields. Task Force 38's carrier air groups exploited this breakthrough with devastating effectiveness. Commander McCampbell redeployed his squadrons from defensive combat air patrol missions to offensive strikes against previously secondary targets. With Japanese fighter opposition eliminated, American dive bombers and torpedo planes could approach their objectives with virtual impunity, allowing them to achieve unprecedented bombing accuracy against fuel depots, ammunition storage facilities, and maintenance installations that had been too dangerous to attack during the initial phases of the operation. The systematic destruction of Japanese logistics infrastructure represented the most significant strategic achievement of the Christmas Day strikes. Lieutenant Commander Henderson's torpedo bombers concentrated on petroleum storage tanks at Cavite Naval Base, achieving direct hits that created massive fires visible from 100 miles away. These fuel reserves had been carefully accumulated over months to support planned Japanese counteroffensives, and their destruction effectively ended any possibility of sustained air operations from Philippine bases for the remainder of the war. Simultaneously, Marine Aircraft Group 14, operating from recently captured airstrips on Leyte, launched coordinated attacks against Japanese positions on Luzon's northern coast. Their F-4U Corsairs and TBM Avengers worked in close cooperation with Task Force 38's carrier aircraft, demonstrating the kind of inter-service coordination that had become a hallmark of American Pacific operations. Marine pilots used their intimate knowledge of Japanese defensive tactics to guide Navy strike groups toward the most vulnerable target areas, while carrier-based fighters provided top cover against any remaining enemy aircraft. The breakthrough achieved by American forces extended beyond mere tactical success to represent a fundamental shift in the strategic balance of the Philippine campaign. With Japanese air power eliminated, General MacArthur's ground forces on Leyte could receive continuous close air support without fear of enemy air attacks. Supply convoys could operate during daylight hours, dramatically improving the logistical situation for advancing American units. Most importantly, the Japanese High Command strategy of using concentrated air power to disrupt American operations had been permanently defeated. Rear Admiral McCain's Task Group 38 1. Exploited the collapsed Japanese defenses by extending their attacks to previously untouchable targets deep in enemy territory. His carrier air group struck airfields as far north as Apari and as far south as Legazpi, systematically destroying every military installation capable of supporting air operations. The Japanese had dispersed their remaining aircraft to these remote locations, hoping to preserve some striking capacity, but American intelligence networks had identified most of these positions, enabling comprehensive attacks that left virtually no enemy air assets intact. The coordination between different American task groups during this expansion phase demonstrated the sophisticated command and control systems that Admiral Nimitz had developed throughout the Pacific War. When reconnaissance aircraft from USS Enterprise identified a concentration of Japanese seaplanes at a hidden base in Lingayen Gulf, Admiral Mitscher immediately redirected strike groups from 3 different task groups to attack this target simultaneously from multiple directions. The resulting assault destroyed 15 enemy seaplanes within 20 minutes, eliminating what had been one of the last effective Japanese aviation units in the Philippines. Japanese attempts to mount counterattacks with their remaining aircraft proved futile against American defensive systems. The few enemy bombers that managed to approach Task Force 38's position were intercepted by radar-directed fighter patrols operating 50 miles from the main carrier formations. These extended defensive zones, maintained by constant combat air patrols, ensured that no Japanese aircraft could approach close enough to threaten American ships. The technological superiority of American radar and communication systems created multiple defensive layers that enemy aircraft could not penetrate. The psychological impact of complete air superiority extended throughout Japanese forces in the Philippines. Ground troops who had fought tenaciously against American advances now faced the prospect of continuous air attacks without any possibility of friendly air support. Radio intercepts revealed increasingly desperate messages from Japanese commanders requesting reinforcements that their superiors could no longer provide. The destruction of air power had effectively isolated every Japanese garrison in the Philippines, leaving them vulnerable to systematic reduction by overwhelming American forces. As the sun reached its zenith on Christmas Day 1944, black smoke columns rose from 27 different locations across Luzon, marking the funeral pyres of Japanese air power in the Philippines. Admiral Halsey's gamble of committing his entire striking force to a single massive operation had achieved results that exceeded the most optimistic pre-battle estimates. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had lost their capacity to conduct meaningful air operations anywhere in the Philippine archipelago, opening the door for accelerated American advances that would ultimately liberate the entire island chain months ahead of schedule. The immediate tactical consequences were already becoming apparent as American ground forces on Leyte reported dramatically reduced Japanese air attacks against their positions. What had been daily harassment by enemy bombers and fighters virtually ceased, allowing American engineers to complete critical airfield construction projects without interruption. This logistical advantage would prove decisive in supporting the upcoming invasion of Luzon, scheduled for early January 1945. By 1400 hours on Christmas Day, Task Force 38 had achieved total victory in the largest single-day carrier operation in naval history. Admiral Mitscher's final strike report documented the destruction of 347 Japanese aircraft, 27 major military installations, and 19 ships of various sizes, while American losses totaled only 23 aircraft and 18 aircrew members. This extraordinary exchange ratio reflected not only superior equipment and training, but also the devastating effectiveness of coordinated carrier aviation when applied against unprepared enemy forces. The Japanese had gambled that Christmas Day would provide them with a respite from American attacks, and that miscalculation had cost them their remaining air power in the Philippines. The systematic destruction of Japanese aviation fuel reserves represented perhaps the most strategically significant achievement of the operation. Intelligence estimates indicated that over 25 million gallons of aviation gasoline had been destroyed in tank farms and storage facilities across Luzon, representing nearly 6 months of accumulated fuel supplies. Without these reserves, Japanese air units could not sustain operations even if replacement aircraft and pilots became available. The fuel shortage would force the Imperial Japanese Army to rely entirely on ground-based transportation for supplies, dramatically reducing their mobility and defensive capabilities. Admiral Halsey's decision to maintain continuous air coverage over the target areas throughout the afternoon prevented any Japanese recovery efforts. When enemy ground crews attempted to repair damaged runways at Clark Field, they came under immediate strafing attack from patrolling F-6F Hellcats. Similar attacks disrupted repair efforts at Nichols Field and other installations, ensuring that no Japanese airfield could return to operational status. This sustained pressure demonstrated the overwhelming numerical superiority that American industrial production had achieved by late 1944. The strategic consequences of the Christmas Day operation extended far beyond the immediate destruction of Japanese air assets. Intelligence reports indicated that the Imperial Japanese High Command had planned to use their Philippine-based aircraft as the core of a major counter-offensive designed to disrupt American advances throughout the Pacific. With these air units eliminated, Japanese forces throughout the region would be forced to adopt purely defensive strategies that could only delay rather than prevent American victory. The initiative had passed permanently to American forces. Task Force 38's withdrawal from Philippine waters proceeded according to plan, with all carrier air groups successfully recovered by 1800 hours despite the extensive day-long operations. The efficient launch and recovery cycles demonstrated the operational proficiency that American carrier forces had developed through 2 years of intensive combat experience. Unlike earlier Pacific operations where aircraft recovery often proved challenging due to damage or fuel shortages, the Christmas Day strikes encountered minimal Japanese resistance, allowing normal flight operations throughout the engagement. Before we break down the final consequences of this operation, share your thoughts in the comments. Support the channel with a subscription so that more people can discover real Pacific War history. The immediate tactical analysis confirmed that concentrated carrier aviation could achieve decisive results when applied against fixed targets with inadequate air defenses. Japanese commanders had dispersed their aircraft across multiple airfields, hoping to prevent catastrophic losses. But this strategy proved ineffective against American forces capable of attacking all target areas simultaneously. The coordination between 24 different carrier air groups represented a level of operational sophistication that no other navy could match in 1944. Commander McCampbell's post-action report emphasized the critical importance of achieving initial surprise in large-scale carrier operations. The Japanese had been caught completely unprepared, despite clear intelligence indicators of American intentions, suggesting fundamental failures in their strategic assessment capabilities. Their assumption that American forces would reduce operations during the Christmas holiday reflected a dangerous underestimation of American commitment and operational flexibility that would be repeated throughout the remaining months of the Pacific War. The success of Operation Christmas Package validated Admiral Nimitsch's strategy of concentrating maximum striking power against critical enemy vulnerabilities, rather than dispersing carrier forces across multiple objectives. The 24 Essex-class carriers represented the largest concentration of naval aviation ever assembled, and their coordinated employment had achieved results that no previous military operation had approached. This demonstration of concentrated firepower would influence American naval strategy throughout the remainder of the war. Japanese radio intercepts revealed the devastating impact of the operation on enemy morale throughout the Philippines, Garrison commanders reported that their troops had been profoundly demoralized by the complete destruction of Japanese air power, while requests for evacuation increased dramatically among units that had previously fought with determination. The psychological effects of air superiority often proved as important as physical destruction in determining campaign outcomes, and the Christmas Day operation had clearly demonstrated American air dominance to every Japanese soldier in the Philippines. The logistical implications of Task Force 38's success enabled General MacArthur to accelerate his planned invasion schedule for Luzon. With Japanese air resistance eliminated, American transport aircraft could operate freely over the Philippine archipelago, dramatically improving supply lines to forward units. This logistical advantage would prove decisive during the upcoming ground campaign, allowing American forces to maintain operational momentum that Japanese defenders could not match with their disrupted supply systems. As Task Force 38 sailed eastward toward their next objective, Admiral Halsey transmitted a congratulatory message to all participating units, acknowledging their unprecedented achievement. The Christmas Day operation had demonstrated that American naval aviation had reached a level of professional competence and material superiority that could overwhelm any Japanese defensive position. The war in the Pacific had reached a tipping point from which Imperial Japanese forces could never recover. The Christmas Day carrier strikes of December 25, 1944, established a new paradigm for naval aviation that would influence military doctrine for decades beyond World War II. The operation demonstrated conclusively that concentrated carrier aviation could achieve strategic objectives previously requiring months of sustained ground campaigns. Military historians would later identify this engagement as the moment when naval aviation definitively proved its supremacy over traditional surface warfare, validating the theories that American naval planners had developed since Pearl Harbor. The tactical innovations pioneered during Operation Christmas Package became standard procedures for subsequent Pacific operations. The coordination between multiple carrier air groups, the integration of naval gunfire with airstrikes, and the systematic suppression of enemy air defenses established templates that American forces would employ throughout the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These lessons proved particularly valuable during the final phase of the Pacific War, when Japanese kamikaze attacks required unprecedented levels of air superiority to neutralize. Admiral Mitscher's command and control innovations during the Christmas Day operation revolutionized carrier warfare tactics. His use of centralized air operations centers to coordinate strikes across multiple task groups enabled unprecedented tactical flexibility while maintaining strategic coherence. The combat information centers aboard flagship carriers became the nerve centers for complex multi-carrier operations, with radar operators and communications specialists working together to manage hundreds of aircraft operating across thousands of square miles of ocean and airspace. The technological superiority demonstrated by American forces during the Christmas operation reflected the enormous industrial advantages that the United States had developed by 1944. The F-6F Hellcat fighters that achieved complete air superiority over the Philippines represented the culmination of 3 years of rapid aircraft development that had transformed American naval aviation from a defensive force into the most potent offensive weapon in military history. The TBM Avenger torpedo bombers and SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers that destroyed Japanese installations with surgical precision demonstrated manufacturing capabilities that no other nation could approach. The strategic impact of the Christmas Day operation extended throughout the Pacific theater, enabling accelerated American advances that shortened the war by several months. With Japanese air power eliminated from the Philippines, General MacArthur's forces could concentrate on ground operations without worrying about enemy air attacks against their supply lines and beachheads. This operational freedom allowed American commanders to pursue more aggressive strategies that maximized the advantages of their superior equipment and training while minimizing casualties among their own forces. The human cost of achieving this decisive victory remained remarkably low by World War II standards. Task Force 38 suffered only 18 aircrew casualties during the entire Christmas Day operation, while inflicting devastating losses on Japanese forces that numbered in the thousands. This favorable exchange ratio reflected not only superior equipment and tactics, but also the professional competence of American naval aviators who had learned their craft during 2 years of intensive combat experience across the Pacific. The memorial significance of the Christmas Day operation has been preserved through numerous monuments and museums that honor the sacrifice of American servicemen who participated in this decisive engagement. The USS Lexington, Admiral Mitscher's flagship during the operation, serves as a floating museum in Corpus Christi, Texas, where visitors can experience the Combat Information Center that coordinated one of the largest naval aviation operations in history. Similar memorials at Pearl Harbor and other Pacific War sites ensure that future generations will understand the strategic importance of this remarkable achievement. The veterans of Task Force 38 who participated in the Christmas Day operation carried forward the lessons they learned during this engagement throughout their post-war careers. Many became the senior officers who guided the United States Navy during the Cold War period, applying the principles of concentrated striking power and technological superiority that had proven so effective against Japanese forces. Their experiences during Operation Christmas Package directly influenced the development of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and the long-range strike capabilities that became hallmarks of modern American naval power. The archival records of the Christmas Day operation provide invaluable insights into the evolution of military technology and tactics during the Pacific War. Combat action reports from participating squadrons document in precise detail how American forces achieved such overwhelming tactical success, while intelligence assessments reveal the strategic planning that made this victory possible. These historical documents continue to serve as teaching materials at naval war colleges and military academies worldwide. The photographic evidence preserved from Task Force 38's Christmas Day operation captures both the destructive power of modern naval aviation and the professional competence of American servicemen who wielded these weapons with such devastating effect. Images of burning Japanese airfields and destroyed enemy aircraft provide stark testimony to the overwhelming superiority that American forces had achieved by late 1944, while photographs of returning American aircrew reflect the quiet confidence of professionals who knew they had accomplished something unprecedented in naval warfare. The legacy of December 25, 1944, endures in the institutional memory of the United States Navy, where the Christmas Day operation is studied as an example of how concentrated striking power can achieve decisive strategic objectives. The principles demonstrated during this engagement, surprise, coordination, technological superiority, and sustained pressure, continue to guide American naval strategy in the 21st century. The men who planned and executed Operation Christmas Package established precedents that influence military thinking to this day, ensuring that their achievement will be remembered as long as naval aviation plays a role in American defense strategy. The final assessment of the Christmas Day carrier strikes must acknowledge both their immediate tactical success and their lasting strategic significance. Task Force 38 had demonstrated that American naval aviation could overwhelm any enemy defensive system, establishing air superiority that enabled subsequent victories throughout the Pacific. This Christmas morning in 1944 marked the moment when the outcome of the Pacific War became inevitable, sealed by the professional competence and technological superiority of American naval forces.